Hi, everyone. Okay, so we're going to talk about the future of the world. I'm glad they gave us 16 minutes. So, all right. So clearly, every technology that emerges has the potential to impact how we relate to each other, how it integrates into the classroom, how it affects teaching and learning. AI has the potential to fundamentally shift how young people learn, how brains develop, how teachers evolve their practice, how they have a new relationship to a technological partner and platform. It also has potential to be a devastating impact on the lives of humans. And as with any technology, we are going to do our best at develop guidelines and practices and principles and standards in order to make sure that we continue to develop all of our species to be critical thinkers, to embody this lifelong curiosity, but also to move society forward in a more just and equal way. So I'd like to start with Randi to talk a little bit about, in your 20 to 30 years of having technology integrated into the practice of teaching, how do you assess the promise and the challenges of AI as you see it right now?
So first off, thank you for that question, and thank you for this panel, and there's clearly not enough time, but what I am seeing is we have this huge pendulum that's going on right now. And some of it is because of fear, but some of it is now because of research. And when I say a huge pendulum, about 20 years ago, there was a very big curiosity about whether or not, what was the role of ed tech? And, sometimes this gentleman to my right and I were on the same side, and sometimes we're on different sides. Sometimes it was about, the pace of implementation. Sometimes it was about what the questions were that teachers were asking. And I think this is what we have actually learned, and I think fundamental to what we need to do when we talk about AI, which is that the human dimension has to always be first and foremost, not the technology. The technology has to be a supplement. It can't supplant. Now, there are lots of places with technology is hugely more empowering than the human mind. But when it comes to the intersection between students and teachers, when it comes to the intersection between families,
yes,
the human being has to be at the forefront. And I think what is now happening, because of research like this book that is by Jared Horvath, The Digital Delusion, and the work by Jonathan Haidt, which has created so much of the cell phone bans. When I say a pendulum, there's going to be a huge pendulum that says, get rid of all screens. And that's not the answer either. But the answer has to be, we have to think about what the screens have done, what it has replaced, meaning a sense of belonging, which you talk about all the time.
And a sense of connection.
And a sense of connection and relationships. And so we're going to be in a race, because particularly in light of the lack of guidance and guidelines from the federal government. And the race is going to be the technology versus the human being. And so the teachers will end up playing a hugely important role, which is part of the reason why, even though I'm an AI skeptic, but I have to be in this role, even though I have to understand its importance. But even in that role, I asked Microsoft, Anthropic, and OpenAI to work with us in a national institute so that teachers could be in the driver's seat, not technology.
So I'd like to get to that. I imagine that the North Star of AI and any technology in the classroom is to allow for individualized teaching and learning to happen and freeing up teachers so that they could do what humans do, which is make human connection, have the relationship, build trust with each individual student, and to have targeted interventions that become clear because you're given a signal from the technological partner. But talk a little bit about this partnership with some of the foundational model companies and what this AI Academy, why it's set up and what you're hoping going to achieve.
So, is that better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
I'm not normally unheard.
Yeah, no one has said that about Randi Weingarten.
So let me just say that this is what we're learning from this institute. First, number one, in K-12, there are many, 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 many teachers that actually want to know the tool and how to use the tool.
Mm-hmm.
So we have many more people, even regardless of what they think about the tool, they still want to know how to use it. So we have
That's encouraging.
We have a lot of people. We are oversubscribed at all times, and we wanted to make this institute place-based because we wanted it to be, again, the human dimension, having teachers who know the tools, actually teaching adults about how to use the tools. And and we've had, very fundamental training, and we've also had some, secondary kind of training, and we're watching teachers, and there's a good Ed Week story about this today. We're watching teachers be creative and envision exactly how to use the tool as you just stated. But this is what we're also learning, and this may be somewhat controversial. What is happening is there is a reduction of attention because of screens, and kids are not coming into school with the same kind of sense of inquiry and an allegiance to critical thinking. And this is what we need to think through, how to do education differently that is both more relational again, and more and thinking about that work, but this push, we have to be intentional about the push for kids about how to think and how to think critically and how to deal with the nuance or the abject ignorance of disinformation. And all of this becomes really, really important in a world of AI. So all the work that we now do in terms of, a debate society or a career tech ed, or what you've been doing so well in the XQ schools, that kind of pedagogy, that kind of curriculum really has to start with adolescents, particularly because everything around them is going to be basically cut and paste.
Okay. Sal, well, I understand what you're saying. I think part of the tension now and even 5 years ago has been that the rest of society, the rest of a student's life is accelerating at a certain pace, and then you walk into a classroom and you reverse time, and you're sitting in a classroom that hasn't fundamentally changed, and you're asked to put all the technology that you use outside of the school to the side and re-engage in a way that many children and adolescents find stultifying and deeply boring. And so we need to find a way to actually make it work inside the classroom in the same way as outside the classroom. And Sal, so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your role in this, the platform that you've built. I know 3 years ago you started Conmigo in partnership with OpenAI. And what have you learned? How has that evolved? And devoted to absolutely relevant learning, project-based learning, really moving learning and not substituting that essential relationship of teacher and student. No, in fact, you actually think that moving towards many more of those relationships is the way we need to go rather than less of those relationships. So tell us what you've learned through Conmigo and the overall Khan Academy platform.
Yeah, first of all, we're in 110% agreement. I think, and I've been guilty of this too, it's when you see a new technology, it's very seductive to put the technology in front of everything and say, oh, let's figure out something to do with it. And I think it's always important to take a step back and say, well, what are we trying to solve for in the first place? And a lot of things we're focused on, we could imagine other things that you could solve, but I think there are things that the education community has pretty much validated our best practices. If we can do more active learning versus passive learning,
Yeah.
that's a good thing. I think very few people would disagree with that. If you can do, whether you want to call it differentiation, personalization, ed schools have taught this forever, but it's hard to do logistically. And I would add another element, which is mastery learning. If a student hasn't learned something well yet, don't just move them on. Give them the opportunity and the incentive to really master those concepts. So those have kind of always been, we try to make our true north. And when we saw AI as what it could do, and even 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, we said, well, this could go that much further in if a student is stuck, maybe helping them Socratically nudge them forward. If a teacher needs to customize a lesson plan or help writing a document or a progress report, it could save them time. And so that was the path we went down. I think what we learned very openly is there's a segment of students, maybe about 10-15%, that they immediately, you give them any kind of an AI, whether it's Conmigo or Classroom, or you give them Claude or ChatGPT, and they will, for the most part, do constructive things with it. They will ask it the right questions. They know when they're cognitively, they know that they need to learn this topic, and they'll ask the right questions. A lot of other students we saw were not ready to engage with it. And what we saw, they were either frustrated that our AI just didn't give them the answer, or they just didn't even know where to start with what to do. And when we talked, I remember I visited a classroom very early on that was a 3rd or 4th grade classroom, and I saw students saying very strange things to the AI. And
Like what?
And this wasn't a classroom where no one should worry, but like I saw one kid say, "I'm hungry," and this kid was well fed. I don't think this was an emergency type of situation, but it was. And I remember telling the teacher, I was like, "Oh, I think this is inappropriate. This isn't like this was probably too young," and the teacher's reaction was like, "No, they say that type of stuff to me, like very non sequitur, not related to the lesson," and the teacher really liked that they were getting practice articulating what they need, what's a real question, how do you have this? But what
Welcome to elementary school.
yes. What we learned is the first version of AI in a classroom, we did everything we could to have safety there, to make it Socratic, to not cheat, all these things. But it was akin to me walking into a classroom and saying, "Hey kids, my name is Sal. I think I'm a pretty good tutor. I'm just going to sit in the back and someone come to me if you have any questions." And the reality is 10 to 15% of the kids would know how to use that resource. And the rest and to some degree, we saw that a little bit post-pandemic. We spent a lot of money on one-to-one tutoring, but it wasn't as proactive. The kids who needed it the most weren't getting it. It was a little disjoint from what the teachers were doing. So our big, and all of the efficacy studies we've done, and we've tried to break out, okay, is there an effect that we've seen from AI purely? And honestly, we haven't seen it done harm, at least in the context that we've been using it. I think it is doing harm in other contexts. But the real learning is happening from kids actively doing problems at their zone of proximal development, at their learning edge. There's no secret there. And if anything, over the last 3 years, our biggest efficacy study we had, interestingly, that I'm very proud of because it validates Khan Academy, but it also validates the need of a human being in the room. It's actually came out of India. We've done many in the US, but in this one, the control group was just Khan Academy dropped into a classroom, the teacher was there, but they didn't have a lot of support, et cetera. And then the treatment group, they had Khan Academy Plus, in India they called a lab in charge, which was an extra support, a paraprofessional, to help the kids stay engaged. And you saw almost a half of a standard deviation in 7 months. So it was and this was University of Toronto independent study. And I'm proud of it, but it also spoke to the need of the human being. You needed a combination of both.
Yeah. So I would like to ask both of you, how do we ensure collectively that the change and the evolution that needs to happen, and needs to happen rapidly, doesn't only happen outside of the classroom, but happens inside of the classroom concurrently? So I'm curious about both of you. How can we together work so that that pace of change actually is felt in both places?
So we need to see, when it comes to education, that AI is a tool, not a displacement for a human interaction. It's a really formidable tool, and it's a tool that that the older the kids are, the more they're going to be engaged in it as part of problem solving. What we need to guard against is that it becomes the displacement for knowledge acquisition, because that is going to hugely hurt brain development. And we see that already in terms of screens. And so but your first question about how we make sure school is a safe and welcoming and interesting and relevant place for kids is going to be the dominant question that we have to answer right now.
Yeah, I think once again, we should just look at the resources and the goals we have and just try to solve that in the simplest possible way. I've been speaking to a lot of boards of directors and faculty at different universities, and they're sometimes surprised coming from me. The first thing I say is, your students are cheating using AI, like all of them are. Anything, your honor codes aren't working. These AI detection tools are snake oil. They have a 40% false positive rate, and kids are running it through these things called humanizers, which also turn those into a 0 positive rate at all. And so
they're clever.
They're doing it. And so you as a university, and I would say this is to some degree happening in K-12 as well, you need to take a step back, and it is healthy to audit what are the things that we want the students to truly be able to do on their own.
Yes.
And some of the things we've historically put in K-12 and higher education probably is busy work. They don't have to do it. But a lot of it, I think it is important to know how to write by yourself. It is important to be able to compute by yourself, to have critical thinking, to have some content knowledge, or a lot of content knowledge about history and science and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when you decide what those things are, first step is do those in class. Do more. And this isn't just to undermine cheating, which it does. That's actually the only way to, there's other ways that a little bit more technology can undermine cheating. But it also backs up this, how do we make the classroom more active? For a very long time, especially at the university level, someone lecturing to a room of 200, 300 people, kids are kind of passive. That's never been the best practice. You should either have a discussion or put them in groups together or have them doing some problem solving. It's also more equitable, because if we have to do our essays at home, in the old world, even if we weren't cheating, my mom's an English teacher, your mom is working the night shift. Not fair. But now you're in the classroom, you get the support of the faculty and of each other. And then the next step is, if you think students are going to have to do some work independently, which we think they should, one, if you have some writing samples in the classroom, you can compare, and technology could even help compare that, hey, this isn't exactly the same student.
You probably don't even need technology for that.
And you don't need technology for that. Go ahead.
No. What Sal is saying right now is so important, because it requires a mind shift. We cannot become police officers about whether or not our students are cheating.
Correct. Yeah.
People will cut and paste.
Yeah.
And kids will cut and paste, and they'll be 10 steps ahead of us. That notion of what the classroom looks like going forward is fundamentally different. The classroom has to be about problem solving. It has to be about knowledge application. It's no longer going to be about knowledge acquisition in adolescence through college. And so that becomes the challenge that we have about how we change education so that it is really engaging and relevant to young people's lives.
100%.
I completely agree. And how are you making this happen so that this is underway with the pace that matches the pace of change that's happening
So,
in society?
so look, you have done XQ for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And you see what the pace of change is in K-12, both in terms of, this is not just public schools, this is charters, this is privates. What I've seen in the last few years that is a fundamentally different kind of pace and really exciting is what we're doing in the career and tech ed space. Because I've seen the pace of change hugely change there, and I've seen kids actually be much more adept at all of the skills and knowledge we need them to have going forward. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from this career tech ed space that we could apply in this for kids right now.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Well, as we wrap, I'd like you each to tell everyone if you could decide on one course that every high school student had to take in person, in the classroom, what would that course be?
I was going to throw out things like law or things that I think should just be in the curriculum that aren't there. But I'll throw out something that I've been speaking a lot. People ask me what is a skill that everyone's going to learn? And we've always known these things that we've historically called soft skills, durable skills matter, but they don't show up anywhere on our transcript. I think we all believe one of the values of being in an in-person physical school is that collaboration, dealing with conflict, communication, that implicitly happens. But once again, it oftentimes, it definitely doesn't get explicitly assessed. It might,
Right.
They might try to do it through certain projects. I'm convinced, and this is where AI actually could be interesting, although I don't think you should just gravitate to AI. I think you could use peer-to-peer, you could use other mechanisms, where I would want a course where you learn to be an expert at these human skills. And it sounds hard, but you go into one game simulation after another where you're role-playing, you're having a dialogue. We have this on a sister nonprofit schoolhouse where we pair high school students on really tough issues, Israel-Palestine, affirmative action, gun control, with kids who have the exact opposite point of view.
Yes.
And then they have a dialogue, not a debate. And then afterwards, they have to give each other feedback and steel man the other person's argument. They have to say, I heard, this is what the other person heard me. And that actually becomes the evidence that actually many universities are now using. They don't care about your point of view, but you could go through these types of conversations in a constructive way. And you could imagine a course that does that over and over and over. And I actually think that's going to be the most durable skill of all in the AI world.
Thank you.
If I had my druthers, in an age-appropriate way, every single child would go through a civics problem-solving exercise, not by themselves, but with a group of people, so that the relational skills, the collaboration, and all of that would be learned. So could you imagine if you had a 7th grader who was thinking about, with his or her or their classmates, how to actually get a stop sign in front of a street in San Francisco, that the street that was going down at a 45-degree angle, and how to get stop signs at every other block, and who they would have to go to, and
Right.
how they would have to deal with this, and which places would they go. And so using society to help problem solve, and then to all the policymakers, when a young person or a group came to you, you would actually spend the time figuring out how to get it done. And so could you imagine what the world would look like if you kept on doing these kind of things? And as they got older and older, doing exactly what Saul was talking about.
Excellent. Thank you both very much.
Right,
Thank you for
thank
this
you.
conversation.